Our next speaker, he is reusing his fun fact for like the second or third time. And he said that's because he's spoken so many times, he's out of fun facts. I don't think we can let him get away with that. But his fun fact is that he is very proudly an econ PhD dropout. And he encourages everyone to drop out of their PhD program. And he would love to have a chat with you about the benefits of dropping out. Please welcome 7-time speaker, Alex.
Just a little bit about me. I lead solutions engineering and support at Posit, formerly RStudio. I've been there for about 6 years. I am a former data scientist and Segway tour guide, which was my fun fact 1 year. I used that up, but I am an econ PhD dropout, and happily we'll talk about that with anybody who will listen. This year, in addition to the debut of my baby, I also released my other baby, which is a book, DevOps for Data Science. Thank you. This talk is mostly a chapter from that book. So if you think this is interesting, maybe you'd like the rest of the book. It's available for free online. I'll give you the link at the end. And I occasionally blog at alexkgold.space. Okay, so let's talk about Auth. Most commonly, people think about Auth and they believe it is not their problem. Well, again, that's somebody else's deal, right? That's like the IT admin's thing to deal with. But unfortunately, the reality is that Auth comes for us all. Because we are in this room mostly data scientists or aspiring data scientists, we want to put work into production. We want to put work into systems that matter, systems that make use of data that matters. And when you're doing that, you're going to be dealing with Auth, right? And we'll get into what actually that means in just a moment. So why don't I start with a story? And if you don't have a very particular opening fanfare in your head, you're not as big a Star Wars fan as I am, just from reading those words. So not that long ago, but also very long ago, at Posit, we had an environment we called the test drive environment. And it was a thing that let customers try out the Posit tools before they would use them. And the test drive environment had a login screen that looked like this. You don't have to be a security researcher to know what the problem is here. And perhaps unsurprisingly, these environments did get hacked and got used to mine Bitcoin. Thankfully, nothing more pernicious than mining Bitcoin, but they did get used to mine Bitcoin. And then we shut the thing down. And I'm not sharing this as an example to say like, oh, Posit people are dumb. Like, they're very smart people who did this, just not a lot of time on their hands. But instead, just to sort of use this example of when you're trying to do things and put them into production, you end up running into concerns around Auth. It's unavoidable that you'll run into these kinds of things. And so my point in this talk is not necessarily to help you do things, but to help you communicate with the people who are going to do those things for you. Because if you go to put something into production with Auth, you're probably going to do something like this, because doing harder things is harder. But if you're integrating correctly with the people and the systems who have been set up to do these kinds of things right, then maybe you're not going to make these kinds of blunders, hopefully. So hopefully by the end of the talk, you'll learn a little bit about the vocabulary and sort of the universe of stuff here. As a data scientist, there are kind of two ways you're going to think about Auth. And one is about accessing things. You might have a web service, a Posit Workbench, Shiny Apps.io, Dataiku, Domino, Databricks, Snowflake, right? You might have data sources you access, your databases, right? Travis was just up here talking about using ODBC drivers and stuff like that. You might have web APIs that you use. So you're going to access those systems directly in the course of doing your business. And then you have this other thing that you're going to probably come up against when you put things in production, which is like pass-through Auth, right? And that's like, okay, I'm going to share my code with somebody else, and they're going to log in as them to those same systems. I'm going to put a Shiny app up, and that Shiny app is going to access some data on behalf of the user, maybe as the user, even impersonating them, or a report or something that does similarly. And so there's sort of these two ways in which you might encounter Auth in the universe. So now we're just going to talk about Auth and like what it is. So what I want you to imagine is a building. It's like a secure building. It's like the Pentagon or something. And each room in the building has to be access controlled because there's something secure inside. Now, stick with me. The building is a metaphor. And it's a metaphor for all the different systems inside your company, right? Each room in the building is like a system, right? One room is your database. One room is your Posit Workbench. One room is your API that has its that hosts your secure internal LLM, like Travis was just talking about. So imagine like you need to access control those doors, and perhaps you are responsible for figuring out how to access control those doors. And so you actually have two concerns. And this is an interesting piece of it. There are actually two concerns. The first is somebody comes up to the door and they want to get in. Who are they? How do you verify who they are? This process is called authorization, sometimes called authn. That part's very, I don't know why they say that. The second problem you have, though, is once you've verified who they are they allowed in, right? Like if I come up to a door I'm not supposed to get into, great that you verified it's me, but if you just let me in because you verified it's me, like you didn't do the thing, right? You didn't do it. So there are actually these two components to auth. There's authentication and authorization are the two components of auth. And you'll hear people talk about them separately, which is why, I want to make that part clear. So let's imagine like the simplest thing you could do, which is like you got a bunch of systems and you just let each one run a username and password list for you. So like each service, you have a different username and password. That's fine. It like sort of works. Hopefully you have like LastPass or 1Password or something. The problem is that if you're in a large institution, an enterprise, a government organization, right, this runs into a lot of problems very quickly. And as an analogy, like basically what you've done is like for your doors inside your building that is a metaphor, you now have a guard in front of each door and they have like a list of passwords that they are keeping personally in terms of like whether you're allowed in. And like there are a lot of problems with doing it this way. So problem one, yeah, that looks really secure. You just like have a list of passwords. Do we trust that this person is writing down the list of passwords securely, that they're not like sharing them with people? They're not like radioing them to their buddy, right? And these are all like, they're technical, right? Like, are they properly hashing and salting their passwords and storing them securely? Are they, if they're passing through those passwords, are they diverting them somewhere, right? These are real concerns that you might have with a digital system, as well as just, our imaginary guard. And so this is the topic, credential management, right? How is that service managing credentials? Ideally, you don't want it to manage credentials at all. Second, how do you know that those passwords are good? Like maybe the system lets you make really crappy passwords, can't rotate them, whatever, right? The password is password. Credential quality, right? Additionally, these days you get a lot of need, a lot of places where a username and password is not a secure credential for the purposes of doing that, right? Many of you probably have CAC cards. You might have MFA, you might have biometrics, you might have pass keys these days, right? All these things that are more secure than usernames and passwords. You're at the mercy of that system having implemented a two-factor authentication flow that integrates with the two-factor authentication service you have. It's a mess, probably not a good place for credential quality. Third, what if you've decided now you want to revoke access from people to these services? Like you got to get notice to that guard somehow, right? And this is sort of centralized access management that, if you have to go around to each service and manage access separately, right? That's okay if you have like 5 people at your organization, but if you have 500 or 5,000 and hundreds or thousands of systems, you can see very quickly how you need a more centralized way to manage access than just like going, system by system and allocating access there. Then there's also, auditing, logging, monitoring, these sorts of things, right? The often, right, in the event of a data breach, you need to be able to go back and check who did it. Again, you're at the mercy of that system. Did they do a good job of implementing auditing, monitoring, that sort of thing? So that was a lot of problems with this system. So these are, if you talk to your IT admin, what are they concerned about Auth? They want to make sure credentials are handled securely, or ideally not at all, no credential handle. You want to know that it supports the kind of credentials that you need for your organization, right? Your organization probably has standards on what kinds of credentials they allow. You want to be able to manage access, manage authorization in particular, centrally. You want to ensure compliance and auditability. This fifth one, I couldn't figure out a way to make this work in the building analogy, but it's like, very often these days, you want to be able to spread your auth not just within the network that the servers your company owns are inside, but also use like cloud systems, right? Maybe you use Google Docs, maybe you use Microsoft 365, not hosting your own server, right? You want to be able to auth to those systems as well, to external systems, which is a difficult technical challenge. And the last one is sort of system compatibility. Maybe you at your company have sort of centralized on a particular service and you want to be able to use that in various kinds of ways. So one of the things that come up here, and you'll hear this all the time from admins, is SSO, right? Single sign-on, SSO. What does SSO really mean? Who knows? It's like SSO is a description of a way you want the world to work, right? SSO, which stands for single sign-on, means like you want somebody to put in a username and password in one place and then like get into all the systems you want securely. But that's a description of a user experience, not a description of a technology. And so there are a lot of things that can do SSO. There are also a lot of things SSO can mean. So if you're talking to an admin at your organization and they say, we need to do SSO, you need to ask them, what does that mean for us? Because it may mean something very different at different organizations. And so that's an interesting challenge. So what I believe SSO should mean is this sort of like maximalist thing where it's good at all 5 of these things. It's good at credential handling. It ideally doesn't handle credentials. It supports all kinds of different types of credentials. It allows centralized management of access. It allows compliance and auditability, and it's cloud friendly, right? Those are the things that I believe SSO should mean, but that is not always how it's used. Good luck. Okay, so let's talk about some different ways you might see Auth work and sort of evaluate it against these criteria, so you can understand when you're hearing from the IT admins at your organization, like, no, this is not going to work for us, why they're saying like, nah, that's not going to cut it. So let's go back to this simple example we used of sort of very simple authentication where you just sort of have your different services and each one has a username and password combination that they just use for you. This fails on every single front. It is not good. I mean, I guess you might have compliance and auditability, but then you have to like go around to each system. So like this is just all around all of these sort of concerns of a centralized IT admin organization. Like this is no good. Just no. Okay, so let's think about like the next level up we kind of take this, which is like, okay, let's say instead of giving that guard and having them manage a list of passwords, you tell them your username and password and they like radio it back. They're like, hello. They say their password is password. Is that the password? Right? And so this is a slightly better system. And this is an analog to a system that is in common usage still in a lot of places. It relies on something called LDAP or Active Directory. LDAP stands for Lightweight Authentic. Thank you. Yep, Directory Access Protocol. It is actually a tree-based database. Anyway, we do not need to get that into the weeds. But like basically what you're doing here is instead of having each username and each system have its own username and password store, you have one centralized username and password store. So you have one username and password, you hook all the services up to LDAP AD on the back end, and they all talk to that one LDAP AD server. So clearly, this is in some ways better, right? And this technology came out in the 90s. It is still in very common usage. And so there are a lot of good things about this technology. It's not perfect, so, right? Credential handling, this is a little better, right? At least the credentials are getting passed on somewhere central, but like you still have to trust that service is not doing something funky with your credentials along the way. It's not like storing them somewhere secret. Or even less pernicious, right? That they're just like doing a good job at handling them and not accidentally exposing them somehow in what they're doing. Again, this usually just supports username and password auth because that's what you can pass through easily to an LDAP AD server. It does allow for centralized management, so that's a plus. That's good. Compliance and auditability. Usually that's better because you have the centralized service. Again, cloud, no good. LDAP AD is like pretty much entirely used within a single network. So like if you're going out to the internet, LDAP AD is probably not gonna work super well for you. Okay, so how could we improve this further? So what if like when you go into the imaginary building that is also a metaphor, you like walked in and you're like, hello, here's my credential. I am Alex. And the guard gave you like a door pass and you then went up to the door and you like scanned your card and you got in. Like, that seems pretty good. So this is basically like the mental model for what a modern SSO system looks like. And here's what this actually looks like in a technical sense. This is you have another service. It's called an identity provider, at least most of the time. You may have Okta. Okta is a very popular identity provider these days. They've like taken over the market in a lot of ways. You might have Microsoft Entra ID. They're a very popular identity provider. You might have OneLogin. That one's kind of going out. Jump Cloud. Like 5 years ago, there were a whole bunch of companies that were trying to win at being the identity provider, and basically Okta and Microsoft Entra ID have like taken this entire market. But so what you do is you go to that identity provider and they give you back a token of some sort. And this is a secure token. It's cryptographically secured so that you know it's from the provider you think it's from. It is unique to a service, and then you go, you take that token, and then you go to your service, right? And this is much, much better on basically every front. Credential handling, yes. The only service you have to trust is the identity provider, right? Unlike even LDAP AD, you don't have to trust each individual service. You just have to trust the identity provider. They're the one who hold the credentials. You trust them. Similarly with credential type, because Okta and Microsoft Entra ID have strong incentives to support a wide variety of credentials, they do, right? And if Okta supports your credential type, you're good because all they do is they hand off a token. They don't hand off the credentials. You have centralized management, it's all at the identity provider. Compliance and auditability, all at the identity provider. And cloud, this depends a little bit, and this gets into like some of the technical weeds we're not going to get into here. But usually, yes. So this is good. This is what a good SSO system looks like. And these days, if you're going to go set up some new system, like probably whoever the IT admins are at your organization are going to insist, like, this is what we are doing, right? You need to be able to handle some sort of SAML claim or OAuth, OIDC token. Which leads me to the next bit. Let's get to some R code. Like, this is the R conference. It's fun. JK. Nope. Lol. No chance. No, like, this is bad. Like, I know this is the R conference, right? We love R here. And I am biased, but I'm not wrong. Don't DIY Auth. Like, this is too dangerous. It's really, really hard to do this right. You know, I can just say from my personal experience, right? Like, we joke at Posit that Posit Connect, the product is Auth, but I think like that's largely true. Like, we have a whole product. We've spent millions and millions of dollars building over a decade, and basically the product is Auth. So like the bottom line here is just like, this is really hard to do right. Integrate with Auth that you have. Don't try and build your own. So some things you might actually, let's talk a little bit about some of the technologies that are going to come in there. So hash and salt, that means you're DIYing Auth. Don't use these words, that's bad. LDAP or Active Directory, these are Microsoft 1990s era centralized access servers. It's still okay, but it's mostly for inside a walled off network. Kerberos is a very secure way of doing that pass-through data access thing. Also 1990s tech, but it's very secure, still used. SAML, this is early 2000s SSO tech. It's cool, mostly again for inside a single network, not cloud-based, but it's used very commonly if you're inside an enterprise or government network. OAuth, OIDC, this is the state of the art. Late 2000s SSO tech, cloud first, invented I think at Twitter. JWT, JSON Web Token, sometimes called a JOT. I don't know why, like, why would you pronounce those letters JOT? It annoys me. But anyway, that's like the SSO token thing when you're doing OAuth or OIDC that you'll be passing around. You may have seen some of this if you do like Google Drive auth stuff. So some code you might actually do to use this, right, is sys, setenv, and getenv to securely manage passwords in your code. You might actually work with JOTs depending on the system that you're using. And if you're in an app on Connect or like in shinyapps.io, you might use information that has gotten passed in from your identity provider, right? And if you're used to using like a Shiny app, in Posit Connect, you have the session $user variable, which gives you the username of the user, which you can use to alter sort of what your app does, or session $groups is similar. A couple more little points that would be good when you're communicating with the IT admin organization. Data pass-through. Not as easy as it seems. This is something that I have to explain all the time to IT admins. I don't understand, but you can now explain this to the IT admins at your organization. They want it to work like this. User logs in, they get an SSO token, they're on their like data science platform or on their laptop, and then they go to the data source, they give that SSO token to the data source, and they get their data back. This is a nice idea. 100% does not work. And the reason is this. It's that SSO token is not good for the, like, each SSO token is for a particular service. And so if you're logging into one thing, you can't just like hand that same token off to somebody else and be like, see, got my token. You have to actually do a sort of token exchange kind of thing. This is kind of, doing this token exchange thing is kind of tricky. You know, let's talk at the bar if you're interested. But just to say, if you're talking to admins who like want you to do pass-through auth, and they're like, it should be easy, you can just pass off the OIDC. Like, no, you can't do that. It doesn't work. And you can help explain that actually there's a more subtle thing going on where you actually have to do an exchange of one token for another because it's not the same token that works in both places. Okay, that's it. Hopefully you learned a little something about Auth and you're convinced that it matters. If you're curious, if you want to learn more, if you thought this was interesting and you want more stuff about boring topics that is secretly interesting, my book is available at do4ds.com. It's there, it's free. You can just read it. You also can buy copies if you want to give your money to any of the various companies that sell books. I blog sometimes at alexkgold.space. That's it. Thanks, folks.